Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 224, season 5, episode 11, number 11 in our series on indecision, where we go deep on the decision-making processes of our forefathers, foremothers, our leaders. We really understand how and what they went about thinking and doing and why and where and what's at core, because those ideas really inform, or at least should inform, how we think and how we operate in our day today. Hope you had a good week. We were awakened again this morning in the middle of the night with another siren. So operating on a little less sleep, but not always used to that happening. It's happening more here where we are of late, but I have faith in God and trust in our military to take care of us and to secure us and to keep watch over us. Our topic of the week is leadership and balance, Joseph's mastery of vision, power, and people. So what do you do when you're responsible for competing priorities? Each one of those priorities is critical in its own way, and the stakes, no surprise, couldn't be higher. So how do you lead when every decision that you have to make risks tipping the balance in one direction or the next? This is leadership. This is the challenge of Joseph in this week's reading. And this is the challenge that many of us face in our day-to-day. So after being reunited with his family after many, many years of separation, Joseph got what he wanted. Everyone's back together. They're back together under his auspices and responsibility in Egypt. But now he has to decide how they're going to integrate into Egypt, how he's going to secure their survival, and how is he going to preserve their rather distinct identity. At the same time, he has to maintain his loyalty to Pharaoh, loyalty to his position and his role and his responsibilities, and to the people of Egypt who are relying on him in this incredible moment of famine and danger. How do you do that? If you're a CEO of a company, or you lead a division or a team, or you're a founder, and now you have to integrate your team into a new culture, a new environment, a new location. Or you're head of a household and you have to move. So you're moving your family from one location to the next. They've been comfortable, they've been happy, things are good, things are fine. And now you have to uproot them and then reintegrate them somewhere else where there are effectively competing responsibilities going on at the same time, or competing goals, minimally. Your own success, maybe because you moved for a job. The family's success, their survival, their ability to thrive. How do you do that? What's the framework that you can set to do that helps you as a leader make the decisions easier, more quickly, and more effectively and more successfully over time in such a moment where you're juggling, let's say? And so unpacking this, let's start with Joseph. His competing needs. He has, on one hand, he has Egypt and Pharaoh, ensuring the nation's survival during this famine, and of course, maintaining Pharaoh's trust. I think that's something that is crucial. Pharaoh is no slouch. He's no mini leader. Pharaoh is the leader of the world, the most powerful person in the world, and Joseph is his number two. And I imagine that even if you're the most powerful person in the world, you're always paying attention to the rivals, to the threats, and you're always thinking about the trusts that your people have in relation to your wants, needs, and goals. And so as much as Joseph has been there and been in that role for many, many years, I think there's always a healthy space of skepticism that exists in that space because he's still a foreigner. So that's one. Two is his role in Egypt. He is the administrator the prime minister, whatever term you want to use, and the one responsible for making sure that the plan that was implemented years ago to store the goods and the food so that it would be available during the famine, he's responsible for that, and therefore he's responsible for the safety and the health and the security of the people of Egypt. So there is his fidelity to Pharaoh, there's his fidelity to the country that he is the leader of, and then by extension is his fidelity to the people that he is responsible for. At the same time now, he has to have the responsibility to protect his family that's now arriving from a distance. They're immigrants, they're foreigners in every way. Their survival, their identity, their unity, and their future, because the fourth piece here is the covenant that's involved as well. Each of these demands is valid and essential, and each of them requires careful consideration, careful planning, needs success. And how do you do that? So for yourself, for the moment, reflect for a moment. What are the things that you're balancing at the same moment? Maybe it's personal or professional growth, at the same time that you have to manage the team's growth that you're responsible for as a manager. Maybe you run a large company and now you have the company's goals, your long-term financial success as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, securing your family's financial future. Your health maybe is a different balance that you need to put into consideration. Your health versus the amount of time you need to spend at work. The ability to balance these things. How does that work? And so Joseph, in an image, sees himself the following way. There are 4 or 5 or even 6 roads that cross at a certain point each other, every single one of them. And standing in that crossroad at that point is Joseph, because every single one of these roads runs through him and is managed by him in some way. That's a lot. So if you want to look at it as a Venn diagram where all the circles overlap, that's where Joseph is. If you're looking at it as roads converging, that's where Joseph is. And so you can't and you don't get to manage each of the different priorities and responsibilities in isolation. You have to do them all at the same time. You can't put one off for the other. Now, he has a head start because he has many years with Pharaoh. He's already started to implement the plan vis-a-vis the food and the famine in Egypt, and now his family is the new abiding concern. So he's ahead a little bit, but now they're overlapping, and he has to deal with all of them at the same time. And so when you're bridging these spaces, or when you're standing in the nexus between all those different spaces, like, what do? There's a lot of risk and pressure in that role. There's the risk of overloading one of the priorities. If he favors Pharaoh, then he is potentially alienating a family that he just reunited with. If he prioritizes his family, it potentially erodes his credibility in Egypt. There are cultural tensions. Egyptian disdain for shepherds could create some social friction because his family is in the business of shepherding, making the family vulnerable to all kinds of outcries and prejudice and discrimination, to use a modern term, at the hands of the Egyptians. And then there's the personal strain or risk or pressure. As a leader, the ability or the inability to manage all these things and balance them at the same time, you get spread too thin. You affect everything when you can't prioritize anything. To give it a different image almost, remember when I was a kid, there was a game called Don't Tip the Waiter. It was a rather dumb game, but I remember it fondly and playing it on many occasions, most likely on a Sabbath afternoon, a Shabbat afternoon with a friend. And the idea was basically there was this, image of a waiter made out of cardboard, and he had a tray in his hand, and he was on this sort of, he was swaying, And you had to always put like additional items on top of the tray without tipping the waiter. And at a certain point, it would start to shake. And if you were, you're trying to have fun or you're trying to tip the game in your favor, you might put a piece just slightly on the edge that would move it in a certain direction a little bit, which would force the competition, your friend, whoever you're playing against, to try to balance that out the other way. And now you're in this space where you're close to tipping the waiter. So how do you not do that? How do you not overweigh one side versus the other? How do you, and can you redistribute the weight, the tensions and the stress and the pressures to get it right, or minimally to maintain balance? Again, because every one of the priorities is important. You can imagine the conversation that Joseph might be having with an advisor where he looks stressed. And the advisor is like, I think you got this. And he's like, no, I'm nervous. I'm worried. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of tension. This is a close advisor. And the advisor maybe says to him, like, hey, look, the people trust you. Pharaoh trusts you. They see how your leadership has really preserved them to this point. Is there a way that you can frame what you're trying to do for your family, maybe as part of that preservation? And herein lies the key. Because when you start to look at the actions that Joseph takes, you have to appreciate the strategic nature of his plan. Because he has options, but he has to be careful. And so what happens here is really important. Joseph introduces, without saying it out loud, a guiding principle. The one thing that's going to guide every single one of his decisions, and then will shift the frame of how he markets or sells a strategy to everybody involved that ultimately benefits the guiding principle. The guiding principle here is the Abrahamic covenant. His family's long-term future. That which is passed down from his great-grandfather to his grandfather to his father, now to him in Egypt, an appreciation of the idea that they're going to be in a strange land for an extended period of time and come out of that and become a great nation. That is his guiding principle. You might call it North Star, something we talked about at some point, I think in season 3 of Coaching the Bible. And by virtue of framing everything or having that as a center idea, the guiding principle is the Abrahamic covenant, everything begins to fall into place, and he's able to begin to make everything work because he's established a firm principle by which everything is going to operate. And you can do that too. And you think about that. When you're in a space of making a large decision, or you have to make a big decision, and you can't figure it out, I would ask you, and I've done this with some clients in coaching, what's the guiding principle? What are the fundamental values here? Or slightly differently, what are your overarching goals and what you're trying to accomplish here? What that does, it allows you to prioritize potentially different decisions into hierarchy to some degree. So this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3. It also allows you to prioritize how you will go about doing things in terms of actually implementing. It'll help you also orient how your pitch point or your sales point or your marketing is going to be on something. And so in the case of Joseph, choosing the location where his son is going to live, presenting certain siblings before Pharaoh, presenting his father to Pharaoh, talking about their employment as shepherds in a certain way we'll get to in just a second, Joseph applies this idea, and what it allows him to do is really important. It allows him to get consistency across his actions. It allows him to avoid short-term pitfalls. It allows him to hold on to and enable the long-term vision of the covenant. And this is simply just Joseph being way smarter and way further down the line in his thinking than everybody else in the room. It's not new to him, but it is important to appreciate. So how does he do it? Let's take a look at it. So first, by framing his family as shepherds, he's creating space and distance between his family and the Egyptian society, which allows him to keep the family identity. So they can still integrate because they're still going to do business, they're still going to be there, they're still going to be in Goshen, they're still going to need foodstuffs, they're still going to have to participate in the country, but it allows them to preserve their individual identity. It allows them also to settle in Goshen. Because they need the fertile land and the space for their sheep, it provides for some sustenance, potentially, but it also provides for some geographic and cultural separation. So they can live how they want to live, do what they need to do, and do that independent, separately, and out of the eyes and out of the vision of most of the Egyptian people. He's dealing with the internal dynamics. So in sending them back to the father with supplies and giving more to Benjamin, he is pressure testing their alignment, their unity, their convergence, their trust as a unit. And by allowing him to now focus on the work at hand with respect to taking on the wealth of the people, taking on the people themselves as potentially as slaves, he is now able to also manage and implement the plan of surviving the famine, as it were, during this time. And so what he gets is, he gets to help everybody. He gets to help everybody succeed. He gets to have them feel that he is focused on them, prioritizing them, working for them. And at the same time, he's able to do what he needs to do to preserve the long term. This is incredibly strategic positioning. Because had he established the family as a business that was similar to Egypt, that wouldn't have worked. Had he established them as being similar to the Egyptians, that would have been a problem too. Had he brought forward before Pharaoh the strongest brothers, perhaps, that would have been a negative. By presenting his father before Pharaoh, he's showing a very heavy level of respect. But at the same time, he's able to spread things around so that everybody wins. But it only works because he is centered around the guiding principle. And here is how he's thinking about it in his own mind. Goshen is where the family will grow. This is where the family will have a future. This is where they'll have a chance to thrive. This is where they can keep the covenantal promise in place so that they can see it in the long term. Pharaoh should be secure with the work that I'm doing because the people are thriving here in Egypt, even in the space of a famine. There's enough food for everyone. But I want to make sure that he doesn't look at me in a way that I am now redirecting more of my attention towards my family. I don't want to lose sight of who they are. I don't want to lose sight of who I am. I want to make sure that Pharaoh gets enough of me to make this work. Am I doing enough? And so he is still, even though he gets the decision-making right, he's still always balancing at the same time. And so you as the leader are thinking about this in your space of your North Star, of your guiding principle. How are you going to put the people in your trust into the best place and positions to succeed and to win when it is that you're balancing competing needs, competing wants, competing desires, competing goals. And then how do you evaluate the decisions, and how do you adapt the strategies and the decisions in those spaces to make the decisions and then implement the plans that actually help everybody to succeed without destabilizing the individual, without corrupting the larger plan and the larger scheme, and without destabilizing or causing some sort of injury to the larger goal, the larger mission that is at play. And so Joseph's decision-making power here in balancing in the moment show again that this isn't about achieving perfect balance. It is, though, about always trying to maintain some level of clarity, adapting the strategies, and aligning the competing needs with some sort of unifying vision or unifying principle that allows for balance, that allows for an opportunity at congruence between all the competing forces, and allows the ability of the person in charge to ultimately maintain the long-term vision and to create the success. To finish that with a quote, as always, the challenge of leadership is to be strong but not rude, to be kind but not weak, to be bold but not bully, to be thoughtful but not lazy, to be humble but not timid, to be proud but not arrogant, to have humor but without folly. That's a quote from Jim Rohn. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. I look forward, as always, to seeing you next week. Wishing you all a wonderful weekend ahead.